Hello, we are outside, which I haven't been outside for a video for a while. And today, what you're gonna notice is some fresh soil. We're talking about preparing freshly for a new garden bed, or in this case, I've been planting new trees. Now you're gonna see behind me new trees I've been planting. If you've been following along on my stories, my daily life, this has been taking up a large part of my life lately because it was a big project. But I left an area unfinished, kind of unadulterated, nothing done to it, because I wanted to go through the steps, because lots of questions I get, and I'm sure a lot of you have this too, is what do I do when I want to start from scratch, when I don't have a garden bed, or when I want to plant a tree? What are the steps you take? So this is going to be leading us through those steps. What steps do we need to prepare for? What do we need to think about when planting? All of those things that go into the befores, the before the beauty hits, the before the trees are planted. What do we need to think of? So first, what we have here is the area where my trees are going. Now, your garden beds, if you're putting in a new flower bed, whatever it is, they're gonna vary by size, by shape. You can see even behind you here is a garden bed that I put in this spring that these trees are gonna come into, but it has a different shape. It has, shape and beautiful curves to it. And how does that work? So when I first start out, I think of my overall size and my shape. If you don't want to spray paint on your yard, you can even lay out garden hose, what you water with, and you can lay that out in a shape on your yard and start playing around with the pattern and the overall size of it to see what you like. Then what we want to do is, I like to get rid of the grass and the roots. So that pretty much means remove sod. Now, this is the strenuous part, and I'm going to admit, when we do things at home, we can't always afford just to go have someone come in and get everything ready. These trees were expensive. I bought a lot of trees. I'm doing all the work by myself because I want to save money, and that's how it can be for preparing for a bed. So what we're going to start with is talking about getting rid of the sod. Now, I love to use, this is the cheapest way to do it, by the way, just takes elbow grease, a half moon edger. So let me show you here how I use it. So just like I did on the flower bed behind me, and then what you can do here where I already have a lot of the grass kind of finished is, I can take my half moon edger, and this isn't only for edging, this just gives you nice lines that you can make a shape out of if you want to. You could come up and make a rounded shape there with it. But then what it will allow us to do is take the grass out really nicely. And honestly, I want to make this curve a little bit more deep here, so I will keep taking out some of this grass. And what I'm probably going to do is even come back here and shape this out a little bit more, which you can see here the curve is starting to come out. And what I'm doing is lifting as I go, and then you can instantly see the line and the shape I'm getting. And what this allows me to do is now go get my spade, and I can lift this sod out of there. So I'm gonna go grab the spade. So I usually would go get my straight or flat spade. In this case, I have a rounded one because that's what I have with me. And I have Kip here to help me. He likes to more supervise. He's not the best at helping, but we take what we can get. Now here we can go in underneath that sod, and we can just start lifting it. Since I've had some good moisture lately, by the way, so we've actually had some rain, which is really nice. And now I can go in underneath it, and as we get more to where the grass is, you can see we're just lifting it out, and then it comes out in these pieces. Now, these pieces, if you want to, go patch them in bare spots in your yard where you have grass that hasn't been growing. These have roots on them. It's just like buying sod. And if you get out nice pieces like this, you can easily use them. So here you can easily start shaping. See how that just comes out? Now you can go as thin, an inch, 2 inches, however deep or thin you want to. But this is how you first get the grass out when you want a flower bed. And that's gonna allow you to have this bare dirt, soil, it's soil, this bare soil that I have some beautiful Iowa black soil here. And now we can start talking about amending. So step one, when I'm preparing a new bed, whether it's for a tree, I take out the sod. Whether it's for a flower bed, I take out the sod. That's step one. Step two is leveling the ground if you need to. Once you take the sod out, you can see usually it's fairly level, and you want to make sure your soil is somewhat worked. Now, if your soil is very hard and compacted, I would definitely say you should till it. So on a raised bed or something, I obviously talk about how tilling is not something you want to do. But why it's important in an area that has been stepped on, walked on, compacted over the years is because that ground is so tight that it could be hard for new roots to get through. It could be hard for you even just to dig holes. It could be hard for new energy and life to get into it. So in that case, I would say it's always good to start maybe with a fresh till. And so you could use a rototiller or push behind if you live in a bigger area, and you could rent a tractor one if you needed to. But what I'm doing instead, since mine is somewhat freshly tilled, is I'm making sure I'm raking it and I can see that the top few inches are nice and loose. And it's important to have it tilled because our next step, our final and third step, is the amending part. And that's the part that can be really hard for some people. I get it, even for me. Do we amend? Do we not amend? When does it need it? When does it not? You know, my soil, I'm someone that always says it looks rich and black and loamy, so surely it doesn't need anything. But good looking soil doesn't mean it's always high in nutrition. So let's talk about one of my favorite things to amend soil with, and we're gonna actually do it. So when it comes to amending, I will always say, instead of synthetic fertilizers, instead of something that is just a fake chemical put in the soil, I will always add compost. Compost adds not necessarily fertilizer. It adds nutrients, macro, micronutrients, but also great healthy bacteria. So when I don't have enough of my own, I do compost. I use up a lot of my compost year to year. Even though I want a bigger pile all the time, I don't get it. So I choose an organic compost that's gonna be really healthy and good for the soil. And so what is great is, when it comes to good compost, how do you know if it's good? Well, I start with organic compost because you don't have to worry about fake things that are put into it. So when you open it up, do you see how nicely it is? It has a little bit of bark in it, a little bit of bulkier material. That's important with compost. That's what's gonna help it be slowly broken down over time into your soil. It also, guess what? A lot of people worry that compost is just either a manure or a byproduct that's gonna have a foul smell. Compost shouldn't have a foul smell. It should almost have a, if anything to me, a slightly sweet smell, which I know you're gonna say, Caleb, it doesn't smell sweet. Yes, it does almost, and that's what you want. If it has a foul smell, or kind of sour, it means it's not fully composted and you shouldn't use it yet. So in this case, if it's gonna be a garden bed, kind of like I have just in front of me, this raw soil, I'm gonna start by taking this bag and just sprinkling it over, and we're gonna work it into the top few inches just with our rake. You could do this with a rototiller too if you wanted to, anything. But this is gonna act not as a mulch, but as a compost. It's gonna be worked into that soil. And that's what's important here to realize is compost isn't something that has tons of like gross additives to it. It's a natural byproduct. And what it will do is naturally and slowly feed and build your soil. That's why even yearly, I will add compost to my soil. So if it's a garden bed, add compost. It slowly breaks down into the soil. It doesn't burn plants. It doesn't get too strong unless it's not fully composted. Again, that's really important. But what if you're just planting a tree? That can be really like, what do we do in that case? So I happen to have a hole here because I was able to actually use an auger for most of these holes, and I have one that's dug. So let's talk about that. So this tree is obviously large. It's a balled and burlap tree. I took the burlap off of it, the wire off of it. But when I want to amend with a tree planting, I will amend with the native soil and use up to about 50% of this. So I'll add my compost, and you can see at first it's like, well, it almost looks like a mulch. That's okay. We're gonna actually mix this in now with our native soil, which this is the native soil. And you can see how beautiful it looks. But what we're gonna actually do is bring in the soil now into here, and it mixes in as I'm just putting it around with my hand into the compost. So I like to think about a ratio of 50% of an amendment, in this case, it's gonna be compost, to 50% of the natural soil. You wanna add in your native soil, even if it's clay, even if it seems hard, because what that does is it gets the roots acclimated for your native soil. They're gonna have to venture out into it. So I wanna mix these together until they're one. So as I rake the soil, mix the compost, that's what I do for a tree planting. For the type when you put it on a garden bed, I rake it into the top 2 or 3 inches of your soil, and that's gonna be worked enough. Once we have this worked in, which again, like I had said earlier, it can be with a tiller, it can be with a rake, but once you work it in and mix it with your native soil, look how beautiful instantly I think it makes the soil. And I think that's what's important to realize is, I'm working up a sweat, okay? That's what's great about gardening. It's a full workout. But when you're going to actually amend a flower bed, I think we oftentimes think we have to till it in really deep, 6, 8 inches or more. You don't need to do that. On things like a tree where they have deep roots already, I did that. But on things like a flower bed where you're doing small perennials, small plantings, you're gonna be working in just the first few inches of the soil. So working in up here is gonna allow it to slowly work down into the soil. over time, that's gonna slowly break down and go deeper into the soil, get to the roots, get to everything you want. So, we talked about a lot of things, and it seems a little boring, seems a little dry maybe, but these are important things for getting ready for the beautiful stuff that's coming. So, these are the 3 things I talked about. When you're preparing a new bed, you first wanna remove the grass, the sod, anything that has restrictive roots that make it not easy to plant. In this case for me, it was sod. Number 2, you want to till or work up the soil. If you can do it with a rake because it wasn't compacted, that's great. If it's compacted, you're gonna need to use a rototiller or something. And then number 3 is amendments. If you're working in a bed where you're gonna plant flowers, perennial shrubs, work it in the top 2, 3, 4 inches of the soil. If you're working with a tree, mix it with the native soil, about 50% ratio, and then put it back in around the tree so you're getting it closer to the roots and where it's gonna really do a lot of good work. Those are my 3 tips that to me make a huge difference and can really prepare you for success in the future, because that's what this is all about. So that's what I hope you do with this. I hope you get excited. I hope you feel more confident in your garden beds. Guess what? We're all learning, we're all growing just like the plants. So a few tips, a few tricks, a few nutrients will make a huge difference. Happy planting. I'm gonna keep working. I have more trees to plant.